Hey, Brian King here, ADHD Success Coach. So, what is synesthesia? I posted this question earlier on Facebook, and by the lack of responses, I'm guessing a lot of you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So, let's bring it up to speed, because this can play a significant role in the lives of people with ADHD or Asperger's or anybody else with some unconventional wiring in their brains. Synesthesia is a word that means joined together, and it refers to the fact that for some people, their senses have some cross wiring, so that when one sense is activated, so is another. Let me give you an example. There's an autistic savant named Daniel Temmet. I think he lives in the UK. And several years ago, he was able to memorize and recite the number pi to an obscene number of places. I think it was in the multiple thousands. And one of the things that he explained in terms of his ability to do this is that when he hears or says a number, he also sees a color. So that means his sound is paired with his vision. So he has that joining together in his mind. So one of the things that helped him memorize was that he remembered the color combinations, the orders of the colors. And that's one of the ways he helped remember pi. There are some musical savants that hear specific notes and they have a color representation to that. It's like an F sharp would be orange, or a B flat would be red, or something like that. So in many cases, they would compose their music because they liked the way certain colors went together. So it's that joining together that can really add a lot of creativity to people because they're using more senses. They're experiencing something differently. Now, I have a form of synesthesia that pairs my sense of touch and hearing together. And this has some benefits and it has some problems. The way it's a real benefit is when I hear people talk, I actually see the words in the air. It's almost like one of those old style ticker tapes coming across, and back in the time when, I don't know if CNN still does this, but it had the scrolling news, the headlines across the bottom of the screen. So when someone's talking to me, that's what I see. I see, within the span of my peripheral vision, from one edge to the other, I see the words scrolling by as they're talking. So one of the ways this helps me is I'm able to catch every word a person is saying. So if somebody is saying something and there is a hiccup in their logic, or if there's a pattern to what they're saying and how they're saying it, I catch it better than almost anybody. And I learned about this in my master's program when we were studying, clinical observation and listening to the client. I was catching stuff everybody else was missing because they were looking for overall meaning and intent, and I was looking at every single word that was coming out of that person's mouth. So I was able to ask specific, very laser-focused questions. And in fact, in my coaching today, that's one of the things that people work with me for, is that ability to just focus a laser beam on exactly what's not working and the way they're thinking or doing something. And I can attribute that to my synesthesia, the fact that I have this quirky little wiring in my head. And that's something that can't be taught, but if you do have synesthesia, it's something that can be understood and leveraged so that it can really benefit you. Another cool thing about my synesthesia is that when people talk to me, again, in addition to seeing their words, I feel patterns of pressure on my head and my neck. So, for example, one person will talk to me and I'll feel light pressure on my temples and maybe a little tickle in my throat at the same time. And it's almost like a fingerprint. Not everybody, I don't feel them all at the same place on my head. I don't know why my brain does that. I just know it's very interesting. Now, where this becomes a problem is if a person's voice is too deep or too high, the tickle in my throat is so intense that I either have to clear my throat or cough. So there are certain voices or certain sounds I simply can't listen to. I remember many years ago, I was at a restaurant and I think one of the dishwashers or the busboys rolled past this big cart, past our booth, that was full of dishes, and the floor was tile with little gaps in the middle of it. So it was this thump, 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 and a lot of low vibrations, and it was so intense in my throat I almost couldn't breathe. I was almost starting to have a panic attack, and thank goodness that person passed me, because then I did a series of coughs and I was able to breathe again. So it's moments like that where that synesthesia is a real pain in the butt. Okay? Now, I made myself some notes here I didn't want to forget. Yeah, my wife, Kathy. Anybody who's seen me post about her, and she's very private, she doesn't like me posting. She's not quite the extrovert that I am on social media. But one thing she mentioned to me is when she was taking piano lessons, when she was younger, she saw color in the air, which is really, really cool. Unfortunately, it became a distraction, so it made it difficult for her to practice. Now, here's one of the difficulties with synesthesia, and of course there are many, is you can't diagnose it. There's no test for it. The only way you can really know if somebody has synesthesia is if they tell you. I've read stories about little whiz kids who are in 4th grade and doing amazing things with math and so on. And I remember a specific story about a young girl that was learning how to spell. And she was talking to her dad about the different letters that she was learning. And she said something like, "Isn't it really cool how you can turn an O from orange to green?" He says, "What are you talking about?" Then she demonstrated. She drew it. And she says, "Well, when it's this way, it's orange." And then she put a little cross through it, turned it into a Q, and now it's green. So that simple change in her brain triggered something in addition visually to associate different letter shapes with a color. So there are people all over the world who likely have this, and it might not be causing them any problems, but it never occurs to them to question it or bring it up, because as far as they know, this is how the world looks to everyone. One of the greatest revelations I had when my sons began being diagnosed with Asperger's is learning about my own sensory sensitivities, having no idea that the rest of the world did not experience things the way I did. That was probably one of the most vulnerable discoveries, where, holy cow, I'm afraid of so many things because of how they overwhelm me. And for a while I thought that the world is suddenly this real dangerous place, because I was aware that I was a bit on the outside as far as how I was experiencing the world. But then when I was able to accept it and start to look at it more through an advantageous lens, like, how can I use this? How can this be a benefit? How can being super sensitive in some areas benefit me? And that's a different conversation. But it's just part of that whole process of getting to know yourself. How do I perceive things? Why do I perceive them that way? And is this perception useful? Is it helpful for me? Can I use it to help other people? I use my synesthesia every day as a clinician. My listening ability helps people to identify negative thought patterns or inconsistent thought patterns that are causing them to be held back in life. And I'm grateful that I have this because I can use it. And there are all different forms that synesthesia can take. There was one story I remember, and this was some a young lady who emailed me many, many years ago. She said that she has a smell trigger when she sees facial hair. So if you have a mustache, she smells one thing. If you have like a goatee, she smells something else. Oh yeah, Liat, I love what she's saying here. She remembers me describing this in Omaha. I met her many years ago when I did an all-day presentation for teachers in Omaha, Nebraska. And Liat was in the front row, and she was one of the best participants, and we've stayed in touch ever since. I'm glad that you're chiming in here. So this young lady, one of the problems she had is that when somebody has a full beard, she gets the overwhelming smell of garbage. Nobody could explain why this is the case. This is just how her brain is wired. And she had this friend who decided to grow out his beard. And she had a hard time seeing him, looking at a picture of him, and didn't know how to tell him what trouble his beard was causing. And I gave her some email advice on how to approach it, essentially introducing the concept of synesthesia, talking about how it works, how it affects her specifically, and depersonalizing it as much as possible from this gentleman so that she realizes that she's not associating him with garbage, that she associates all beards with that smell of garbage. And I gave her the advice, and I never heard from her again, so I have no idea how that turned out. But hers was such a unique example of what synesthesia can look like. And you can pair any of them together, any of the senses whatsoever. There are people that can feel dizzy when they see certain things, or maybe hear certain things, because it messes with their vestibular system. So a lot to consider here, but one thing I want you to do is just kind of keep your mind aware. If you see somebody who's really musically gifted and they're writing their own music or they're writing their own poetry, you can ask them, how do you do that? What's your process? How do you know what words to use? How'd you come up with this idea? And see if they're able to say, well, it kind of hits me like this, or I kind of see something, or I see a certain color and it inspires me to think about this word. Depending on their self-awareness, they may not be able to articulate it to you as thoroughly, but I bet you there are folks in your life that have some synesthesia. Maybe it's even you. And if you think you may have some, share it below. Let us know how it shows up in your life. If you think your kids have it or a sibling has it, share that too, because these stories are fascinating. It's another one of the myriad of ways that we discover and experience the world around us. And I continue to be fascinated by it every single day. So that, in a nutshell, is synesthesia. If there's anybody that you think might be interested in this, pass it along. This is a fascinating topic to discuss, and I'd like to discuss it further with you. If you have any personal questions about it, you can go ahead and private message me. I'm always available to help you, except when I'm asleep. And again, share it with those who might benefit. This is Brian King. We'll talk again soon.